Hello everyone. Well, I'm trying something new. It's called Panoptos. It's a video lecture, and we're starting with Moby Dick now, and it's a little more complicated maybe than some of the other things that we have read. And I'm hoping that this new format will help you to understand the novel better than if you just read my lectures. That doesn't mean that we won't have any reading material in the lectures, but I'm going to try to do a video recording of my lectures for most of the novel. And I know this is a day that most of you have been either looking forward to or dreading getting to what some people consider the greatest novel in American literature. I happen to be one of those, and that doesn't mean that I'm the great literary god who knows all things, because you may have another choice. But this is just my opinion, and I always like to begin my lectures on Moby Dick discussing the reasons why I teach it. I've had many people ask me that. There are so many other books I suppose we could read, not so much in the early part of the 19th century American literature. If you want to talk about novels, they're quite limited. Many of you, I'm sure, have read The Scarlet Letter by Hawthorne and Tales by Poe, but the novels of American novels of the 19th century are rather scant. But there are reasons why I teach this, and believe it or not, one of them is not because I'm cruel, all right, or because I want to burden my students with a heavy load. College is supposed to be a little bit of a challenge, and so therefore I think that it's a good thing that we read this novel. So I'm going to start today with the reasons why I think we should read Moby Dick, and just a second, let me get my slides going. Why read Moby Dick? That's the question a lot of you ask. Why do we read this novel? Why do you have students who are not English majors read this novel? And I had to think about this for a while, and I want you to understand I'm not trying to justify why I teach the novel. I don't think it needs justification. I think you would ask anybody in almost any field, most people would say that Moby Dick is a book worth reading. But why have I chosen this book? And I have some personal reasons, I suppose, other than the fact that I like it. And here they are. The first one is, it's an American classic. And classic is one of those words that it's rather difficult to define. Who decides what is a classic and what is not a classic? As we talk about those. But Mark Twain probably had the best definition of a classic, at least with tongue-in-cheek, that a classic is a book that everyone praises but nobody reads. And in a way, that's true. In postmodern America, we've gotten away from reading our great literary classics, and I really don't know why, other than the fact that maybe they are trying to make school more accessible for high school students, and so they don't want them to read difficult material. I'm not sure what it is, but yeah, the idea is I don't think you could ask any a scholar of American literature, and none of them would say that Moby Dick is not a classic. It is definitely one of the classics. Other classics in American literature probably would be Huckleberry Finn. Most of Hemingway's novels would be considered classics. The Grapes of Wrath is an American classic, and so the list goes on. And they're enduring; they last. Another reason, the second, is true. The first truly great American novel, and notice I emphasize American here. Emerson called for a uniquely American literature, if you remember right, in reading Self-Reliant. Uniquely American literature, and writers like Poe and Whitman and Melville answered his call. What makes Moby Dick distinctly American? Well, the whaling industry was a uniquely American industry, even though there were whalers in Great Britain, and there were some German whalers, and we'll run into some of those in the novel. America had the market on whaling. It was considered an American industry. It made America rich, along with cotton. While the cotton made the South rich, the whaling industry made the North rich. Number two, the characters are a microcosm or a cross-section of American society. I can even go further than to say that the characters that show up in the book are a microcosm of the world. We have characters from everywhere in this novel, and you'll see that as it progresses. In the first 15 chapters or so, you already have run into Ishmael, an American, and a Christian, and Queequeg, an islander, a Pacific islander who is a cannibal and a pagan. And so there's a cross-section. You run into people like Bildad and Peleg, the Puritan ship owners of the Pequod, and it goes on and on and on. And so it is a sort of cross-section or microcosm, and again, almost a melting pot that you see in America. And number three, Melville was an experimenter. And as I said before, Emerson wanted a new American literature. He tried new forms and ideas that had not been done before. And you'll see this, and I'll point them out as we go into the novel. He uses dramatic techniques like stage directions, enter Ahab, enter Ishmael, and almost like you're reading a play instead of a novel. There are other places when he uses poetic diction, poetic sound devices like onomatopoeia and alliteration, and so you're almost reading poetry. So he combines fiction and drama and poetry and all these things into one novel. So that's why I call it the first truly great American novel. I don't think that necessarily the first great novel. If you want to talk about the first novel, we can go clear back to Don Quixote, which was written in Spain around 1605, I believe, or 1610, something like that. But this one was the first great American novel. Next reason I teach this book is it's the one truly American epic novel. Now I'm getting a little bit more specific. What is an epic? Well, an epic is not one of those terms. It's rather hard to define. When people think of epic, they think of a big book or a huge poem like Paradise Lost or the Iliad and the Odyssey. But what you have in an epic is you have certain characteristics of an epic that are found in all epics. And one of them is great universal themes. Large themes larger than life, good versus evil, the search for justice, the search for revenge, man's search for himself, and those kind of things. You have great, larger than life protagonists, and I think we'll find that Ahab is probably larger than life, even though he is human. And if you're going to have an epic protagonist, you have to have an epic antagonist. And we'll see that you have to have a great, larger-than-life antagonist. And in this novel, I guess most people would consider Moby Dick may be the antagonist, although there is some argument about that. Some people think that Ahab is his own antagonist, and I think there's a lot of room for that argument. And finally, it often involves some kind of a journey, both a physical journey and a symbolic journey. A physical journey, we're going to go a-whaling. We're going to go a-whaling on the Pequod. We're going to spend 5 or 6 weeks traveling the world on a whaling boat, all right, in a ship. And so that is the physical journey. As the Pequod travels around the Cape of Good Hope and goes into the Pacific and those things, we're going to be with them. There's also a symbolic journey, a journey that takes you into experience. Every one of us are in life's journey, and I often use this in some of my lower level classes. The idea that when you leave home and you're gone for some time, and you go back, things are never the same because you've gone through a series of experiences that nobody else has gone through. That you know. So when you go home, people expect you to be the same, but you're not the same because you've gone through a journey. You've gone through life's journey a little bit. So we are going to see Ishmael in this journey. He's not only going to be on the Pequod. You're going to see a change in the way that he thinks about the world around him. Another reason I teach it is because it's not taught anymore, and it should be. How often is Moby Dick or any of the great classics taught today? I usually have a show of hands in my class, and I've had a smattering of students who have read The Scarlet Letter, for instance, or maybe The Grapes of Wrath or things, other novels, but very few. I'm not sure what's being taught down in the lower grades now, but this is a novel that back in the 1950s was commonly taught in high school. Now, I'm not so sure it's high school material. It is a little weighty, but I think that it's still a book that needs to be taught, and there's really no reason why it shouldn't be taught more in college than it is. I believe I may be the only English teacher in the state of Virginia that teaches Moby Dick in his American Lit class. I'm not sure about that. I do know I'm the only one that, at Blue Ridge that teaches it, and the idea is it's just not taught anymore. It's almost as if it were being put back on the shelf. And just to give you a little bit of history here, when Moby Dick was published in 1851, it was not widely received. The world wasn't ready for it. I'm not sure the world was ready for it yet, but it certainly wasn't ready for it in 1851. And so it went into obscurity. When Melville died in 1891, in his obituary, they didn't even mention his novel Moby Dick. They mentioned a couple of the other novels that he wrote that were quite well known, but they didn't mention Moby Dick in 1891. It wasn't until the 1930s that somebody took the book off the shelf and dusted it off and began to read this book and to realize the genius that was behind this novel. But one of the reasons why it's not read, of course, is because some people look at it as difficult. All they have to do is say the word Moby Dick and people get chills running up and down their spine for some reason or other. And I remember when I read it for the first time, I was in high school. I didn't like it. And the reason I didn't like it was because I wasn't ready for it. I was not mature enough to understand it. And when I got into college and had to read it a couple more times, by the time I got to the second or third time and I was a little bit more mature in my reading, I began to really understand that this was not just a typical work. This is a work of absolute genius. And I hope that, by the time you finish the book, when you finish the book, you will realize that you have read a great novel. Whether you like the book or not, you're going to realize that you've read a great book. And there are going to be passages in there that are going to blow you away in Melville's beautiful wordsmithing and the way that he uses language. The second thing is, it's part of our national literary heritage. A country or a society that turns its back on its heritage, whether it's literary, no matter what it is, its heritage is a lost society. And so it's right up there with the rest of them. I think that we, it needs to be remembered, and our children need to know our national literary heritage. And Moby Dick certainly is part of that. It's interesting. Moby Dick is more popular in Great Britain than it is in the United States. People in Great Britain, seem to appreciate it a little bit more than Americans. I don't know why that is, but it seems to be the truth. So those are a couple of reasons why it's important. And it's a great education in cetology. What Melville calls cetology is the study of whales. Believe me, you're going to be reading some cetology chapters, and they're going to become laborious here or there. Chapter 31, I believe it is called cetology. Yes, chapter 30. Let's see. Let me see here. Chapter 32 is called cetology. It's Melville's introduction to whales for you. And throughout the book, he stops the movement of the book, he stops the plot, and discusses certain aspects of the whale. You're going to be reading about the heads of a whale, the tails of the whale. You're going to be reading about the brain of a whale, the skin of the whale, all kinds of things. And there is a reason for it. The main reason is because in 1851, very few people knew anything about whales. They weren't, whale aficionados like we are today. All they knew is that whales were big fish where they got oil so they could burn their lamps. And so he wanted the readers of 1851, to become acquainted with the whale. But also he wants it to show us the magnanimity of this wonderful creature. Melville has tremendous respect for the whale, even though he's talking about an industry that goes out and slaughters them wholesale. He had tremendous respect for the whale, and he wants us to understand that magnanimity of this mammal. And it can be taught across the disciplines. In other words, Moby Dick can be taught in literature, obviously. It can be taught in history. Part of our national history is the whaling industry. It can be taught in science, the study of cytology, sociology, the microcosm of the population on the ship, and the hierarchy of the ship, the mates and the captains and the way that the crew is together. The ship is like a world of its own, and it has its own society, its own hierarchy of people in the society, starting with the captain and going down to the doughboy. And it can be studied in psychology. Obviously, this is going to be a study of Ahab's psyche in many ways. This is a man who becomes so chronically obsessed with revenge and monomania that he just he's willing to destroy himself and anybody around him so that he can achieve that goal. And a wonderful study in psychology. And we also will see psychological development with Ishmael and some of the other characters. Melville was a master of characterization, and I hope that you see that as we go through the novel. So those are some of the reasons why I teach Moby Dick. I think it's an important novel, part of our literary heritage, and I know that it gets a bad rap. I'm sure that many of you have heard things from other students that I've had that have talked about it. I suggest this: you read it and make your own mind up. Don't let other people's ideas about the novel influence you, because you're the one's going to be the final judge of this. If you read the book from cover to cover and follow the assignments the way that we set them up, I think that you're going to realize that you've read a great piece of literature, and you'll be one of the, what is it, somebody did a study one time, less than 1% of the American population has read this book, so you'll be in a different kind of a 1% group, and a very elite group, and you can actually tell the world that you have read Moby Dick. So get ready for we're going to go whaling, and I hope that we have a good time together. All right.